Okay, so we arrived at the last talk of today. What? Just this? Okay. Sorry, we arrived at the last talk of today by Orly Shenker from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And yeah, the playing field's yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't use a presentation. I'll just talk and try to do it briefly. Thank you very much for holding strong until this late time in the evening. Thank you, David, for this invitation. What I'll talk about is an outline of work in progress, which I carry out in collaboration with Meir Chemo from Haifa University. Broadly speaking, our project is an attempt to support reductive physicalism, a quite extreme form of reductive physicalism, which we call flat physicalism. Flat because there are no levels, and because it's flat, it's in your face kind of physicalism. It's a very extreme view, and we try to show that that we can answer all the objections mounted against reductive physicalism and show that it has very strong advantages over all its competitors. So we're protecting an underdog in contemporary literature. Nobody supports reductive physicalism, neither in philosophy nor in science. And so we're trying to save this underdog and make it a leading position, because we do believe that it's much better than all the alternatives, which are much more popular. Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay, so this will not be recorded. Now I can go to the real thing. Okay, so as a starting point, I'm going to do wild metaphysics. And because this is an outline, I will leave room for, placeholders. I'll just say some things that are very broad ideas, and I can add details later in the Q&A, just to give you the big picture of the idea. So as a starting point, we can think of a Cartesian kind of skepticism, which you can take to its extreme form. So we're not committed to that. We don't know that there is anything outside our mental picture, and we're not even sure that we know ourselves very well. I mean, this goes further than Descartes, but people do that. So think about the most extreme form of skepticism that you can accept. In this sense, so we don't know anything, that there is anything outside, let alone the details of it. We don't know who we are, except the here and now, something that there is something in our mind, that there is a mind, and we have a feeling that we have memories, but we're not sure that the past exists, etc., etc. This is a starting point. Now, I'll take this starting point without adding details as a kind of data from which, this is something that we can build on as a fact that we're not going to justify or support except in this very skeptical way, in this via negativa, in this sense, a kind of a minimal starting point. Now, having this starting point, there are two routes that we can take, broadly speaking. One, we may call the solipsist route. The solipsist route says that there is no justification for believing anything over and above what I've just said. So that's everything that there is to it. Now, since we started with something very extreme, with a very extreme form of skepticism, We accept very little in this form of solipsism. We cannot even endorse knowledge claims. We do not know anything about ourselves. So this is a very, in a sense, phenomenological picture of the mental, of the mind that we have. So this form of solipsism is, in a way, the only thing we can do with it is live it and accept it and undertake some form of spiritual way of coming to terms with the fact that this is all that there is. We're not engaged here in any form of justification, of argumentation, etc. This is the end point. This is one route. The other route is seeking some explanation. There is no justification. This is something that we want to do. It's some sort of leap, not of faith, but it's a leap of motivation, you might say. We have this very minimal starting point, and we want to say something about it. This something will be some form of, you might say, explanation. I'm not talking about what explanation is. We can discuss this later, but we can understand it in any form of, any notion of explanation that you want to address. Here, if we take this route of trying to explain this minimal empirical starting point, we are already engaged in some form of intentionality because we're talking about the starting point, so we will need to explain what intentionality is. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So we'll have to explain this, but we can do this later. Just putting on the table. We're not hiding this very problematic obstacle. So the argument that I want to present is trying to see in what way we can give some sort of explanation going through this route of not the solipsistic route, but the explanatory route, if you will. What kind of explanation are we after? Here is, broadly speaking, the target. We are looking for an explanation which is a deep structure kind of explanation. Namely, we're going to talk about something else in order to explain the mental. So we will have to make some leap here, but we want it to be minimal. So what kind of leap are we allowed to make? What we want what we are seeking here is an explanation in terms of an identity theory. Namely, our question is this: given that the mind is, these empirical data, minimal empirical data that we have, we are after a statement of the form, the mind is X. X can be something physical, X can be a computation, X can be some non-material spirit, and any of these, and these are the big theories of the mind, any of these will give us a deep structure explanation of the data. Now, this explanation, this is an important point in this project. We're looking for an identity theory kind of explanation and not any of the other forms of explanation, such as causal explanation, because all the other forms of explanation will lead us to a regression. Because if, for example, we're seeking a causal explanation of the data, we will then have to explain the cause, and we don't want that. We want an identity theory kind of explanation, which is an ultimate kind of explanation. And to illustrate what I mean by an ultimate kind of explanation and why identity theory explanations are more ultimate in that sense than other forms of explanation, I want to quote a parable that David Papineau presented in his 1993 paper. Papineau writes, suppose that there are two groups of historians, one of which studies the famous American writer Mark Twain, while the other studies his less well-known contemporary Samuel Clemens. The two groups have heard of each other, but their paths have tended not to cross. Then, one year, they both hold symposia at the American Historical Association, and late one night, in the bar of the Chicago Sheraton, the penny drops, and they realize they have both been studying the same person. At this stage, there are plenty of questions they might ask. Why did this person go under two names? Why did it take us so long to realize that Mark Twain and Samuel Clemens were the same person? But it doesn't make sense for them to ask, why were Mark Twain and Samuel Clemens the same person? If they were, they were, and there's an end to it. Okay, and Papineau continues to explain this parable as follows. Similarly, he says, the defenders of a physicalist theory of consciousness can say, with consciousness and the physical property A, such physicalists will take themselves to have discovered that consciousness and A are the same property. So they will allow that we can sensibly ask why there should be different concepts of this property and why it took us so long to realize that they stand for the same thing. And indeed, they can answer these questions in the various ways mentioned in the literature on the subject. But the physicalists will continue. There is no further question of why consciousness is always present when physical property A is. If they really are the same thing, then we can't explain why they are the same thing. Somebody who feels that there is still a question here has simply failed properly to grasp the thesis that consciousness is identical with a physical property. We follow in the footsteps of Papineau in this idea. And this idea where Papineau discusses physicalism in this parable, but the same idea holds for all identity theories. So he would say the same for if the mind would be explained as identical to some non-material something, or cognition would be identified with computation, etc. So the identity theory is the ultimate explanation, the final conclusion of the explanatory task. So this is what physicalism is after. And in the project of reductive physicalism, we are after the materialist kind of explanation. We can, broadly speaking, divide the theories available in the literature for millennia on this subject into two groups. One group says that the mind is material or physical, and I won't discuss at the moment what physical or material is. We can address it later if you want. And the other says that it's not material, it's not physical, it's something else. But the two kinds of theories of mind agree that there are things that are not the mind, and those are material. So tables are material, planets are material, trees are material, but with respect to the mind, they differ. Okay, so the combination of what they agree about and what they don't agree about is the crux of what we're going to discuss. Based on this similarity and dissimilarity between these two views, we wanted to ask the following. We're building two theories. One is materialist, physicalist theory of the mind, and the other is something else, some dualistic view or another. And we want to build the theories for these views in a way that has some empirical evidence supporting them. So we can test we can test our theories using the data that we have. And recall that the data is what we started from, very minimal view of phenomenal consciousness, something like that. Okay, so both materialists and dualists agree that there is something out there which is not the mind, and that thing out there is material. They want to say the same thing more or less about tables and planets, etc. Usually, people tend to accept physics, contemporary physics, whatever you want to endorse for this, as the best explanation for planets and trees and tables. And the disagreement is only about the mind. So let's see how these two groups of theories, the materialists and the dualists, can carry out this task of explaining this minimal data using this framework that we just mentioned. So I start with materialism and then compare it to dualism. So according to materialism, the extreme form of materialism, everything is matter, including the mind, including mathematics, including everything is matter. There is nothing non-material. But we focus on the mind and the rest of it, the mind and planets and trees. And suppose that that we conjecture, for one reason or another, that the world is made of atoms, or this is our physics. Now, since materialism says that everything is matter, this means that everything is made of atoms, the mind and everything else. How do we test this theory? Well, according to our starting point, the only data, the only empirical data that we have is the phenomenal consciousness. So if we want to test physics, the physics of atoms, against the empirical data, the only option that we have is to try to explain the mind, the phenomenal consciousness, in terms of atoms, because this is the only data that we have. Here is the point. Usually in science, and I come from physics, this is maybe a biographical point that is relevant here. So usually in physics, when people invent a theory of atoms, they test it against evidence about planets and trees and tables and clocks and etc. in the physics laboratory. But these are not the data according to our starting point, because these are things that feature in the mental picture that we have. The idea that there are planets and trees and tables is part of the theory. It's not the data. So physics cannot be tested on the basis of the question whether or not the theory of atoms can explain trees and planets, because this is not an empirical test. The only way to test physics is whether it can explain the mind. Now, in contemporary standard science, the picture is this. We have very successful theories about planets and trees. And so we build our physics on this basis. We confirm our theories on this basis. And then there is this, building at the end of the campus that studies the mind, the brain, psychology department, etc. And so we take our very successful theories of physics and we apply them on this, minor subject. So far, unsuccessfully. But, the hope is that it will be more successful in the future. So the science of the mind is a small part of the sciences, and the so far failure to explain the mind has no implication concerning the general success of physics. But what I'm saying here, if we start with a skeptical starting point, is the reverse. The only way to test physics is by asking whether it can explain the mind. One option for explaining why there are planets and trees in our mental picture, one option is that there are planets and trees out there. But, you know, as science progresses, we come to understand that this is not the case. But in any case, this is a theory that can be either successful or not. Now, if you have a general metaphysical view according to which it is in principle possible to explain the mind on the basis of physics, then you have a way to test empirically the theory of physics, namely on the basis of the phenomenal consciousness data that we started with. But suppose that for some arguments that are prevailing in contemporary philosophical literature, you come to the conclusion that it is in principle impossible to explain the mind on the basis of physics. There is an explanatory gap, there is the hard problem of consciousness, etc., 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 computational theories, other forms of non-material theories. And suppose that you have very strong arguments in this direction, and you come to the conclusion that the mind cannot be fully explained by physics, as reductive materialists would like to do. It's impossible. In this case, maybe you will be able to explain the mind by some non-material stuff, but you have absolutely no empirical access to test the theories of physics, of tables and planets. Why? Because if you are not a materialist, then you acknowledge from the starting point that planets and trees appear in our mental picture. But this mental picture, if you're a dualist, is not material. It's something else. Now you want to test your theories of physics, but the only empirical data that you have is something that you already say is not part of this material thing. So there is a gap between what you can know empirically and the material world out there. Materialists can say that everything is material, everything is physical. You can only see a small fraction of it, the fraction which is the phenomenal consciousness. So at least there, you have some empirical access to the real world, to the ontology. But if you're a dualist, this small fraction of empirical access to the external world is not available to you. So there is absolutely no way to test your theories about the external world. So you see, it's the reverse of what many people think in this context. Most of the discussions are about whether either materialism or other views are able to explain the mind. What we're saying is that only reductive physicalism can explain the material world, which is not the mind. In dualism, you can say whatever you want about the non-material stuff, which is
interactions between the mind, like Descartes thought, then you have a connection.
Oh, well, so here is a theory. Here is a theory. The theory is this. The mind is not material. But there is some connection, maybe called the material stuff out there has a causal relation to the non-material stuff in here. This is a theory. Now we want to test this theory. To test this theory, we can, it's a nice theory that you will always be able only to test part of the world, which is the outcome of the theory, and you will never be able to take even the smallest step outside of this. Now, you have here in this framework much less options of touching somehow empirically the external world in the materialist. Let me distinguish between two views of the kind that you are proposing. There are two kinds of dualism in this respect in the history of the theories of mind. One is complete parallelism of some sort. In parallelism of some sort, whatever is out there is completely inaccessible, and it's a story that has no empirical support of any kind. And therefore, you cannot support your theory about what's out there. In the causal theories, there are two kinds of causal theories, and I addressed one, maybe I should address the other. Here is the thing. Suppose that there is a causal theory that says the following. Tables and planets, etc., are material. The mind is something else, let's call it the spirit. And planets causally influence somehow the spirit in a way that from the spirit we can infer what's out there. Okay, and therefore we're justified in building our physics of planets, right? That's a requirement. So what we're saying is this. And this brings me to the question, what is the physics that we're doing there? So it's not clear that this view is a true kind of, is a genuine kind of dualism. What do I mean by this? There is this well-known objection to Descartes that came about right after he wrote his ideas that focuses on the mind-body causal problems. Is the causation part of the material world or the non-material world? What can it be? This is maybe to some extent an open question until now. But I want to compare this question in order to understand what's going on to a feature of contemporary physics, classical physics, to make it easier. So in classical physics, there are various kinds of properties. For example, particles have a mass, and which is associated with gravitational force, and they have charge associated with electrical force. So in a sense, there is a property dualism in classical physics. But we don't think of it that way, because these two kinds of properties in the physical world are somehow united. How? Through the equation of motion, F equals ma, both of them somehow influence the motion of bodies, and therefore, because of that, despite the fact that we have two distinct kind of properties and forces, they both influence the same thing. So through this causation, because of this causation, we think that physics itself is not dualistic. The same goes with a table of the many kinds of particles that the standard model, that feature in the standard model. They are somehow connected. Physics tells us how they are connected between them. Therefore, physics is not dualistic or pluralistic. It is one theory because of that. So to come back to this suggestion. If you have a theory that there is something out there that causally influences in a way that you can account for the mental, which we can call spirit. If you have a theory of how this comes about, what exactly is this causal connection, then you don't have two realms of reality. Those are parts of the same theory in which the thing that we now call spirit, because we don't understand what it is part of the theory of matter. It's not a separate theory. So this is not dualism. It's a new physics, it's a future physics that maybe, is it going to be better or not, better or worse than other forms of physics? We don't know, because so far there is no material theory of the mind. So we don't know what's going to happen in the future, in the future science. So this form of causal connection is simply not a form of dualism. It's a form of new physics. If there is dualism, there is no way to access the external world. If it's a genuine form of dualism. So I think I'm closing this argument. So the point is, to sum up, that if we take seriously what philosophers have been doing for millennia, people don't take it seriously in science, you know, that, okay, these are skeptical arguments, let's move on, you know, be serious. We are serious about these are good arguments. And instead of trying to prove realism, to fight these very strong conclusions, we don't fight them, we join them. We accept them, we endorse the strongest form of skepticism that you may think about. And we take it as the starting point of the argument that shows why materialism is methodologically and ontologically and epistemologically preferable over non-materialistic theories, in that it can explain the external world empirically, whereas other options cannot. Thank you very much.